Hey guys, I just wanted to make a video. Oh geez, I just wanted to make a quick video showing a couple of new to me knives that I've gotten recently. This one I got about, I don't know, I think like a couple weeks before Christmas. It's the Chaparral FRN. This has turned out to be a pretty decent little small knife, although what's really been bugging me is that I don't actually have a similar size knife at the moment to compare this to. Um, I think it would be pretty useful to compare this to a Dragonfly or something similar like that, something that's small but ergonomic enough to be used without any serious, discomfort. So I have done some uh, cutting with this. I'll put up some pictures shortly in the thread that show how much material I cut with it. Nothing too extensive, but I spent a total of about 15 or 20 minutes doing cutting on cardboard and some kind of like light to moderate plastics. Um, And I was a little bit concerned initially that the blade is so thin that using this thumb ramp and 50/50 choil on this thin of stock would cause some I guess pretty noticeable discomfort. Um, but in that fairly short amount of time in consistent use, I didn't actually really have any major issues. It's it's comfortable enough just based on that initial assessment. It's a comfortable enough and controllable enough knife to use where, despite the fact that it's only about a 2 inch or 2 1/4 inch blade, from the end of the choil here up, it's a relatively short blade with also not a tiny handle, but I mean it's quite small compared to the Shaman. Despite its relatively small size, I would feel totally fine using this to do um, pretty much anything that you would conceivably need to do in just sort of a day-to-day situation. So as far as like a small, compact, everyday carry type knife for sort of fine cutting tasks and the occasional long session of like cardboard breakdown or that sort of thing, it seems to be just fine. The initial sharpness was pretty high, although I do think that the edge was just slightly over buffed. It shaved very smoothly, dry shaved very smoothly, but it was a little bit lacking in slicing aggression, just based on some newsprint tests and sort of doing Carter's three finger test, just to kind of check for how readily it would sort of bite into the skin. And it did lose that shaving sharpness pretty quickly. That's probably a combination of just the blade being made of XHP, which is a pretty high carbide steel, and also as maybe some of you are aware, the edge could have easily been a little bit overheated. What I noticed about the factory edge, which is now totally gone, I've sort of done like kind of a, I don't know, sort of like a moderate, regrind on this, kind of changed the edge profile. So none of that original factory edge is visible, but one thing that I noticed was that the edge appeared to be ground with a pretty coarse belt and then hit with a buffer, and the spots where the buffer hit it were very reflective, to the point where, Cliff has referenced this in pictures and microscope images before, but you can actually see when you, like, not again, this is with the factory edge that I'm talking about, not this one that I put on it, but you could see when you would turn the blade in the right light, all of the buffed area would just be completely either blacked out or you know, bright white, like reflecting you know, most every wavelength back at you. It was pretty shiny, pretty polished. So that would lead me to think that it's not exactly unreasonable or unfounded to think that maybe the edge was a little bit burnt, especially since it did lose that fine sharpness pretty quickly. But that could have also just been, you know, a number of other things. So I'm not going to, you know, say that I know that's what happened. One other thing that I would note is that Sal talked about the lock bar being pretty stiff. To me, I mean, I can't say that it was particularly, you know, soft to open and close, but I don't know. It was a little bit stiff initially, and now it's sort of just fine. But my hands are used to working with sheet metal, so it's not, you know, that sort of thing, and that kind of goes back to the comfort of using this type of grip right here with the thumb ramp and choil. I might not be the best person to sort of you know, weigh in on that sort of thing, because my hands are used to doing things that I don't think a lot of other people's hands are. So, you know, I didn't really have an issue with the lock bar. I didn't see any reason to take the knife apart. It was extremely smooth opening and closing for a lockback. There's no grittiness at all. It's just kind of a smooth. Once you make it past that initial part right there, it's just a almost, you know, frictionless opening. Very easy to open and close. Fit and finish is not super high, because compared to the Secchi lockbacks that I've had, you can see where the lock bar doesn't actually meet very well with the blade. And then similar back here, you can kind of see that area at the end of the lock bar, how they both kind of dip down, the back spacer and the lock bar. So, you know, not terrible, but I don't particularly mind. I'm not, I don't know, you know, just something to note. I don't really particularly care. One thing that does seem kind of odd is that the clip has already kind of loosened a little bit, like to the point where maybe it's kind of hard to tell, but you can kind of see it there. So there's already a gap there between the clip and the scales, which, I don't know, it stays in my pocket okay, and I'm not really too worried about it, but it does seem kind of odd that the clip is that loose right off the bat. Let me think, what else here? The edge was decently thin. I measured it at around 15 thou for like this first, you know, little bit of the blade here near the choil, and then it was pretty much around, you know, 20 thou, give or take like 1 or 2 thousandths. It was 20 thou pretty much through the entire main sweep of the blade, and then the last, I don't know, you know, 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch of the tip was about 25 thou. So the edge was pretty symmetrical as far as thickness goes. Personally, I think on a knife like this, I would much rather have it at about 5 thou, but I mean, that's kind of asking a lot from a you know, the perspective of like a, you know, $81 factory knife. So I mean, it's not, you know, not really anything I can, you know, criticize Spyderco for. It's still more acutely ground than a lot of other factory knives are these days, so nothing too terrible. I'm probably going to try and find a decent Waterstone, or, well, a decent Japanese-style synthetic stone to, you know, appease Cliff there, even though I don't really, well, I'm just being sarcastic, but I'm probably going to find some sort of appropriate stone to do a regrind on this, because I don't really think any of mine would be a good candidate for it. And I'll probably set the edge at like 15 degrees per side, and then grind it down to like around 5 thou edge thickness, and just kind of leave it like that. And yeah, I think that would be a lot more appropriate on a blade of this thin of stock. And I don't really think I want to do a full 0 on this, just because it's the carbide volume in this steel and the type of carbides that are in this steel, which, as far as I understand, they're mostly chromium carbides, which are quite a bit larger than vanadium carbides usually. I don't think that would be the best choice to do like a full 0 on this just for durability reasons, but a 5 thou edge with a 15 degree per side primary bevel angle would be totally fine, and then I could just do 20 degree micro bevels, and that should eliminate any carbide breakout, or at least for the most part eliminate it, but still give the blade quite high cutting ability. Certainly higher than something like this, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's sort of, I don't know. It's a decent little knife. I don't really have anything too terrible to say about it. I really do need to get something to compare it to that's in this class, because all of my other knives are quite a lot larger than this. So I've been sort of using this as my EDC type knife, and just kind of randomly cutting stuff up with it as I find excuses to do that for a few weeks now. And it's just amazing to me how small it is, because the knife that I was carrying for off duty, like not at work, for probably 6 months or so before that, was a full-size Svord Peasant, which I don't happen to have with me here, but it was the Peasant is just huge. I mean, it's a monster knife, and the handle is anyway, and there's no pocket clip on it. So I mean, to carry this tiny, slim little knife after carrying that Peasant for so long, I don't even notice that I have this. It's a pretty dramatic difference. So yeah, that's the Chaparral for now. I haven't really seen any major issues with it, as I said, so I'll do some more long-term cutting and carving and stuff like that here shortly with this, after I finish up some stuff around the new year here. So now that brings us to the Shaman, which I got for Christmas from somebody. Now this seems like a pretty interesting knife to me, because it's sort of, to me, this is going to be like kind of a heavy utility knife, where I don't really need to worry about too much anyway about lateral forces on the blade or edge. I can leave the edge thickness a little bit higher than maybe I would like, as far as like high cutting ability goes. So I will lose out on some cutting ability, but I can give this to anyone to use for a minute. I can, do just about any, cutting, scraping, prying, that sort of thing, and I shouldn't have any gross damage to the blade. It's not. I don't know. I mean, we've got we got full steel liners here with the compression lock, and a pretty decent sized stop pin in the back there. 0.145 blade stock. And one of the really nice things about this, there are two things that really drew me to the knife, was the scales have this pretty decent rounding to the edges and sort of contouring, which is not very common to find on folders. And they're also relatively smooth. Excuse me. They're also relatively smooth, which again is kind of hard to find on a G10 handled knife. Now, what that seemed to me like would be, I don't know, what that seemed to indicate to me was that this could be a folder that would be relatively comfortable to use for high force cutting, like in a thumb over hammer grip like this, for really pushing through material, carving. Heavy plastics, thick cardboard, stuff like that, like pretty, things that will require a lot of force, or just longer term use on maybe some lower force cuts. I Rockwell tested this today. You can kind of see the dimples. I don't know, there's four of them down there and one up here. I don't know why I did them that close together. I was just kind of being weird, but This came out to be 62 according to that test, but I don't know. It was weird because the initial reading was 61, then I got 64, then I got 62, then I got 62, and then I got 62 and a half. So I don't know. I wouldn't really put too much emphasis on that because I'm not entirely sure. I'm gonna have to talk to somebody in QA or well QC, I guess, at work to figure out what the deal is with that tester. They did not change out the anvil or the bit, the actual point that does the Rockwell testing. That was all the same. And as far as I know, nobody's gone in and calibrated the thing, so I don't know what was going on. But the last 3 tests that I did were pretty consistent, so I called it 62. The first one and the second one were kind of all over the place. But yeah, a couple of things to note about this was that out of the box, it was very tight and very gritty. And I think what happened was that it just seemed to me to be dry, like the pivot seemed to be dry, and that was what was making it feel gritty. And as you can maybe tell, it's still pretty tight, and that's because I actually didn't open this up. I didn't take it apart and do all this polish things and do nano oil and all this shit. All I did was just take some synthetic oil that's a Teflon carrying, PTFE carrying oil, and put several drops of it just kind of in and around the pivot area, and then open and close the knife, and then basically what that does is if you soak that, like put a lot in there, as you open and close it, the oil will work its way out. The excess oil will work its way out. So then I would just take a paper towel and sort of clean up the excess oil, and that took about like a day and a half of opening and closing and waiting, and then opening and closing and waiting and all that kind of stuff. And now it's very smooth in the sense that there's no real sandy gritty feeling anymore, but it is still quite stiff, which I don't really mind for 2 reasons. One, everyone that was doing disassembly videos said that this was Loctited, and my thought on that was good. I would rather have it Loctited and be fairly tight so that I never have to mess with it, hopefully, rather than have it be kind of loose and Loctited, or not Loctited and not very tight. I mean, it just, if it comes from the factory pretty snug, excuse me, and it's got Loctite on it to keep it in place, I don't want to mess with it. It'll wear in faster when the pivot is tight than it will when it's loose, for one thing. And I don't particularly care if it takes a little. I mean, you can see, after a little over a week now, it's already, or excuse me, not even a week now, it's already to the point where I can flick it open. It doesn't do any, the drop shut kind of thing, but I mean, it's not really that bad. And I would much rather have it like this and just know that everything's snug and Loctited, because I actually intend to use this, quite a bit as sort of my all-around heavy-duty folder for a number of different things. I'm even going to try using it for a little bit of like trail clearing with like a 3-finger grip back here, and just really grip it tight and just sort of do little wrist snaps and see. Because I've done that in the past with my military and my Police 3, and I actually have a folder that I use almost exclusively for that, which is a cold steel Voyager XL clip point that I use for like my pocket machete in the summertime when I'm fishing. Excuse me. But I will try this out for that. I'm probably going to chop some zip ties and do I don't know, just do a bunch of sort of more high impact and lateral stress work with this. Yeah, so I checked the edge thickness today. Down around here, it's about 22 thou, and then it sort of gradually thickens up till right about here. It gets like between this point and right here, it gets to be about like 26, and then it gets to 30 at the tip, thousandths. So it's almost like a I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Well, actually, if you just imagine the curve of the edge, that's how fast the thickness increases. If you were to look at that on like a scale, it's like slowly, slowly, more. You know, it just sort of, it gradually thickens out towards the tip. And I actually don't mind that at all, because what that means is that the tip should have, you know, decent lateral strength. I mean, 30 thousandths isn't crazy thick or anything. You know, I'm not gonna, you know, jam this into a 2x4 and you know, try doing 2x4 digging like Cliff used to do. But it should mean that if I'm doing, you know, any sort of like carving or cardboard type work, or, you know, cutting plastics, and I keep it close to the choil, the cutting performance should be decent. The tip is still fine enough and easy to control to the point where, excuse me, despite the slight increase in thickness, well, you know, it's 50% thicker than down here, but despite the increase in thickness, it's not like it's this crazy, unwieldy, unuseful, you know, blunt tip. It's still quite pointy and you know, easy to pierce plastics and things like that with. But it should, especially if I lower the edge angle, which would increase the thickness just because of the grinding, it should you know, be decently stable under lateral stresses. So I'll have to check some of that out too. But I don't know, all in all, I would say that it's a decent knife. But one other thing that I would mention is that this pocket clip, watch this, I moved it from the tip down to, or excuse me, tip up to tip down, because that's just how I like to carry these larger knives. Watch this. You can see it moving. I've never seen that before from a Spyderco, so I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to check these screws again to make sure that I didn't just not tighten them very far, but it's weird. And then there's also one screw, the bottom right one, this right here, that one just spins. I don't understand. It doesn't actually seem to be grabbing the threads at all. You can just turn it endlessly, and that's exactly how it was down here too. So I'm thinking that that screw, I didn't look at it, and I should have, but I'm thinking that it might just be a little bit short or something like that, where it's not actually long enough to engage with the liners under here, which is a little bit strange, but I don't know. So the pocket clip thing is kind of annoying. I'm gonna have to see what I can do about that. Let's see what else. I'm kind of liking the compression lock. It's different. It's different than I'm used to. I'm definitely used to you know, back locks, liner locks, axis locks, that sort of thing. It's this is the only knife that I have or have tried that has that lock. It seems, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm just kind of getting used to it. I don't see how this could ever become disengaged, you know, just from normal, you know, white knuckling. Just, I mean, that certainly isn't going to do anything to it. And then, you know, even you know, pretty decent torques and side loads, I just don't see how that could come on unlocked unless you push it in. One thing I would note is that that bar is fairly stiff. It seems stiffer than you know, pretty much any liner lock that I ever remember using. But I don't really mind that, because this is supposed to be, to me anyway, this is my more heavy-duty knife, and I'm fine with, you know, the pivot being a little bit tight and this lock bar being a little bit stiff. I don't I would 10 to 1 rather have that so that there's no blade play and no chance of this getting bumped closed, than have it be all loose, so I can just, endlessly, flick it open and close like a, like a tweaker in front of the TV or something like that. So it seems fine. One thing I would note is that the initial sharpness on this was quite a bit better than this in terms of a balance between slicing aggression and, like shaving ability, that sort of push cutting ability. This could push cut newsprint on a 45 pretty easily, shave my arm very easily, and also, slice a lot better. It was slicing newsprint and stuff like that a lot. Newsprint, receipt paper, magazines, that sort of fine papers. It would slice and push cut those considerably better than this. This would require more draw. It was just, like I said earlier, it was a little bit more over buffed, I think. This was interesting because while this edge appeared to be coarse and then hit with a buffer, this, I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but it seemed to, let me just see if I can. No, I don't know if it's gonna, yeah, no, that kind of does it. It seemed to, they seem to have ground this edge with a finer abrasive, and then there was no black, buffing. It actually looked like a micro bevel had been applied with a stone of some kind. So I don't know. I've never seen what an edge from like a Tormek or something like that looks like, but it seems that they might have done that with this, because it's just from the factory, the edge looked totally different. I mean, it was very obvious to me that it was ground in and sort of sharpened in a much different manner than this, where this was just a coarse belt sander, well, relatively coarse belt sander, and a buffing wheel. I don't know what did this. This is still the factory edge, by the way. It's still sharp enough where I don't particularly care to do anything to it now. But this seemed to be, ground in an entirely different manner. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but there's definitely a noticeable difference. So yeah, I guess that's these two. I would say this so far I'm pretty happy with. I'm gonna try doing some more long-term, all at once sort of, like maybe an hour's worth of work with this, like cutting with this, while I'm watching a movie or something like that, or listening to a podcast or something, just to see if I can find how long it actually takes for me to have like a lot of discomfort with this to the point where I wouldn't want to use it. And then this, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to have to come up with sort of a battery of cutting, I don't know, cutting tasks to put this through, similar to what I was doing with this, but I'm trying to take care of my I'm trying to do the things that I want to do with the Chaparral before I start getting into this, just for consistency's sake, and so I don't all of a sudden become used to this, which is a much larger and more hand-filling knife, and then go, oh, this one's uncomfortable. I would rather cut for a while with this, and maybe compare it to a smaller knife or a similar size knife, and then see what I think about this, and then sort of move on to something like this, which is kind of an entirely different class of knife. But yeah, so that's it, I guess, for now. I think, yeah, I don't know. I'll try and keep the thread updated with some of my work that I'm doing with each of these in their respective threads. So, and yeah, with that, I will just talk to you later, guys. See ya.